This episode of the Creep Street Podcast is brought to you by Martini Coffee Roasters. You know, people always look at me weird when I say I start off every morning with a big old martini. But then I set them straight, and I tell them I'm talking about Martini Coffee Roasters coffee. A delicious coffee made by the Martini family. They roast their coffee using a traditional method of sight and sound to roast those little babies to perfection. And they also sell green coffee beans for those home roasters out there. And right now, fans of the Creep Street Podcast can get 20% off their entire order by using the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Once again, for 20% off your order, use the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Martini Coffee Roasters, the perfect coffee to keep you creeps caffeinated.
You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
And you have landed in the first Creep Street episode of 2023.
Whoa, 2023 coming at ya, horde.
Welcome one, welcome all. Of course, let's get a little housekeeping out of the way. Of course, like, rate, subscribe. We're on Facebook and Instagram at Creep Street Podcast, Twitter at Creep Street Pod. We also have a TikTok. On our Facebook, we have a little forum where daily we like to interact with our listeners. It's called Citizens of the Milky Way, a Creep Street fan page. Anyone is welcome to join. You just click the Let Me In button and one of us will let you in.
Please.
Fun place to just post stories, memes, fun anecdotes. It's just a great little place to get to know each other.
We're having a good time.
And of course, if once a week is not enough, and let's face it, you Creep Street freaks, once a week is not enough.
It's not enough. It's just not.
Head on over to patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast for all sorts of goodies. Now, Maureen, we are kicking off 2023 with something. This was new to me.
Yeah, you know, this isn't one, I didn't really know much about it for too long either, but I kind of wanted to go into 2023 with something we haven't done in a while, and that is a serial killer.
Well, there we go. Okay, I'm excited because this is one I was not too familiar with. Maureen, what are we talking about?
Today we are talking about Nannie Doss, the Giggling Granny.
Now, a name like Giggling Granny, you wouldn't think sounds too scary, but boy, oh boy, is it.
Yeah, it's crazy. It gets pretty rough.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's talk about it. My sources for today's episode. One was a video on YouTube called Nannie Doss, the Giggling Granny by The Casual Criminalist. Highly recommend you go ahead and check that one on out. Then we have two books. One is called Black Widow by Ryan Green. Then we have Nannie Doss, the Giggling Granny by True Crime Bus Stop Reads. And we also have an article called Nannie Doss Spent Decades Murdering Relatives and Husbands by William DeLong at allthat'sinteresting.com. Now, this story is an interesting one. You know, you don't hear a lot about female serial killers.
You really don't, Maureen.
They're out there. They exist, but it's just not as common, or at least we don't hear about it as often.
Very true.
But especially before everything was, you know, connected with the internet and everything like that, female serial killers, it was much more plausible for them to not get caught.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Going a little bit more, you know, under the radar there.
Absolutely.
So let's dive right into this, okay? And before we get started, though, before we dive right in, just making sure everyone's chill, everyone's on the same page. A little bit of a trigger warning here. There is murder in here, and there is murdering of children.
Oh, yeah. Very true. Very true.
So just wanted to give you a heads up. Like we've said before, we don't often give out trigger warnings or anything like that because it's just kind of clear what's happening, you know, from the title. But just, you know, in case, I just wanted to throw that out there. Now, Nannie was born in November in 1905 in Blue Mountain, Alabama, to a woman named Lou and a soldier. Now, Lou, Nannie's mother, was ostracized from her family ever since Nannie was born because she had a baby out of wedlock. So she, worked odd jobs around town, kind of doing whatever she could do until she met a dirt farmer. I don't really know what that means, to be honest. I don't really know what a dirt farmer is. I don't know if it's like they're preparing to farm other things, but first they got to get the soil right.
A dirt farmer is a farmer who does all the work on his or her property. They have no hired hands.
Oh, okay. Well, there you have it. There you go. Now, James Hazel was just like a miserable man. He was very mean and just an absolute asshole. He really thought of kids as just workers that could be working on the farm for him. And everything was just, having kids and everything like that was really just a business kind of, transaction.
Right.
And Lou only got pregnant during certain times of the year, so she would still be able to work around the harvest time. He had a spreadsheet that would determine how many kids he could have to work the farm, where it was still profitable versus the cost it would entail to feed the kids and everything like that.
Right. Wow. Probably not the best way to go into having kids.
Right. So you respect that. It seems that you're at first you can be like, oh, he's just being practical and oh, he's just making sure there's enough money for the kids, and you think oh, that could be good. But really it's just so that he can figure out how much of a workforce he can have.
Right, exactly.
It's not just him being a financially responsible guy. It's him being a bit of a chode.
Yeah, absolutely.
So he just determined that 5 kids was the limit. So Lou already had 1, Nannie. So they had 4 more children after Nannie. Now, Nannie hated her stepfather. He was, like we said, a miserable, nasty, mean man. And he forced her to raise her siblings when she was just 5 years old. So she was very young, already responsible for other kids. And it's just that's not a good start.
Not good at all.
Not a great start. She was just raising the kids when she was 5 years old. And this was when she wasn't, out working in the fields and doing God knows what. Now, she could only go to school during the winter time because that's when she wasn't needed back on the farm. So she only went to school during the wintertime at all, but when she did go to school, she was bullied and, was having a rough go.
Right.
But even though she only went to school for a part of the year, she really, really enjoyed reading and used reading as a way to kind of escape her surroundings and her miserable existence. And when she was 7 years old, her mom gave her an issue of True Romance magazine to keep her quiet on a long train ride. And she immediately fell in love with the genre. And this was a love for the genre that would go forth for the rest of her life. She just loved romance novels and love stories and just things like that. She was very into it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It was just a very, very much an escape for her. Very, very luxurious. Now, apparently on that same train ride where she was given this magazine for the first time, the conductor of the train slammed on the brakes when he saw a tree on the tracks. And when he slammed on the brakes, she hit her head on a metal pole extremely hard. She got a concussion that caused permanent brain damage.
Wow.
Yes. So now, we're getting into territory where we've heard similar things like this to other serial killers, or just people with maybe some violent behavior, which is, a traumatic brain injury.
Right, exactly.
She would get severe headaches that would last for days. She was prone to depression, long dark moods, and intense rages. She could be found sometimes just screaming or crying. But her stepfather, James, refused to let Lou, her mother, take her to the doctor. So she was just kind of living in this hell, essentially. Yeah. Now, James wasn't just an asshole. He was also, extremely violent. And he would beat Nannie when she misbehaved. But after the accident, Nannie no longer feared violence because she already was in such chronic, excruciating pain.
Right.
So it didn't really scare her anymore. But ever since the injury, the accident, she actually became very violent with her siblings and started beating her siblings, when before she would never do that.
Wow. Okay.
And during all this time, she continued reading her romantic stories and things like that. And she dreamed of love, and she thought these romantic stories could be real. And that it wasn't that it was just that they were real, but it was that she was like owed this kind of love and this kind of life. And she thought that she could get it. But, she wasn't really able to go out and date. That wasn't allowed of her as she got older. And even from a young age, she wasn't allowed to go out and do things with other kids. She wasn't allowed to wear makeup, and she couldn't dress in any way that was attractive because James, her stepfather, feared that she would be molested. Now, this is very interesting and weird that he didn't want her to dress attractively at all so that she wouldn't get molested. And this was kind of the rule for all the kids, or at least all the daughters in the family.
Right.
And you think okay, I guess that's good. He doesn't want them to get molested.
Right.
But it's very weird. People at the time, I don't know if they just didn't really understand or they just turned a blind eye. I don't really know. But molestation usually happens by someone that the victim knows.
You're right. Someone in the family.
Yeah. So James found out that his biological daughters had been molested at a number of family reunions by his cousins and uncles. And when he found this out, he fought all of them and beat them up and said that his daughters were off limits. But Nannie was not his biological daughter and said that Nannie was fair game.
Oh, God.
Yeah. And when he found Nannie being molested on 2 separate occasions, once by an uncle and once by a cousin, he punished Nannie both times for being too flirtatious.
Oh, God.
Yeah, so it's absolutely disgusting. This man is horrendous, and it just doesn't make any fucking sense. This is rough. This is a dark one, guys. Now, Nannie's dark moods at this point were really settling in. And at the same time with these dark moods, she also was still all about these romance stories. She kept going back to her fantasies and reading Lonely Hearts columns and Missed Connections columns in the newspaper. And she just felt like if she could connect with someone, she could get out of this fucking place.
I'm sure, right?
And at this point, we feel bad for Nannie.
Yeah, especially, this stepdad, you almost wish she would have killed him for Christ's sake.
Yeah, absolutely.
God, what a fucking piece of shit.
Yeah. And that's with a lot of serial killers. You feel bad for them, to a point.
Exactly. Especially when they had shit upbringings like this. Yeah.
So when she's a teenager, she convinces her stepfather to let her get a job at a factory in town to bring money in during lean times. And he's like, okay, that's a good idea. Surprisingly, I can't believe she was able to, convince him of this, but it worked. And she got a job at the linen thread mill. Now, she immediately caught the attention of a few different men, but at this point, at least in Alabama, women were still expected to bring some kind of dowry or land to the table when marrying a man, and she didn't have that. So she was a little bit like, well, fuck. But she picked up smoking to be able to have an excuse to chat up men outside the factory.
Okay.
And that's when she met Charlie Braggs. He fell in love with her immediately, and she really had him going. She pretended to be fun and flirtatious and acted the way that all of these magazines and stories and everything taught her to act.
Okay.
People called her vivacious, and it was just, she wooed him. So when Nannie was just 16 years old, she got married to Charlie Braggs.
At 16, huh?
Yeah, she was 16. They dated for a short period of time and then they got married. Now, on their wedding day, the news is broken to Nannie that Charlie's mom, aka her mother-in-law, is going to be living with them forever. And she was a bitch.
Whoa, okay.
She was cruel and a tyrant. So she went from one controlling, manipulative household to another. And this woman, Charlie's mom, was wild. She would pretend to have illnesses to get Charlie's attention so that Charlie and Nannie wouldn't have any romantic time together. And whenever Nannie tried to tell Charlie about this, he just could not believe it. And,
Oh, that his mother would do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Mm-hmm. Not only that, but Charlie's mother would destroy Nannie's romance novels if she found them. She thought they were on par with infidelity, just reading these romance novels.
Oh boy.
So Nannie started drinking and smoking quite heavily, but at the same time, she gave birth to 4 children in 4 years.
Wow. Now you want to talk about working overtime.
Yeah, 4 kids under 4. I mean, that's wild. But as time went on, Nannie was really just cooling on Charlie. She would only have sex with Charlie when it was time for her to get pregnant again, and she would sleep in the kids' room in order to avoid him. But then, when she would go out on the town, she would fuck.
Okay.
She would roam bars topless and would be openly fondled, and she just would sleep around constantly.
Whoa, all right. This is huge for back in the days.
Yeah.
This would have been a huge scandal.
Yeah.
I would assume back in this era.
Mm-hmm. And Charlie was unfaithful to Nannie as well. And Nannie knew this, and she kept a log of every woman that he slept with in case he ever tried to divorce her.
She's keeping those receipts.
Yeah. So at this point, she is a 21-year-old mother of 4. But she is about to be a mother of 2. Her 2 middle children mysteriously and suddenly died of quote-unquote food poisoning.
Oh boy. This was one of the children?
2 of the children, the 2
Two
middle
of the
ones.
children. Ah, okay.
She loved her oldest daughter, Melvina, but the rest of her kids had really become a burden. So she realized if she only had 1 or 2 kids, things would be easier for her.
I think we're about to learn there's a big difference between food poisoning and poisoned food.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah.
But this was just considered to be food poisoning. The doctors were called, the police was called, everything, and they all just thought it was food poisoning. But how this all went down was very strange, So the middle 2 children were eating some porridge, and all of a sudden, they're dead. Charlie came home from one of his weird benders where he was just out there, sleeping around, getting drunk, whatever. And he realizes his 2 children who were previously fine were dead. Now, at this point, no one really thought that a woman could be capable of murdering her own children. So the whole town really rallied around her for being so brave and everything like that, and she was never a suspect for a minute in the eyes of the town or the police or anything like that.
Wow.
But Charlie knew something was up, and apparently he fled his home in the middle of the night with their eldest daughter, Melvina, and left. So he left his youngest daughter and his mother-in-law there just kind of figure it out. But he took his oldest daughter and split. He knew something wasn't right. Who knows how he knew or whatever, but he knew something was not wrong. So Nannie was left living with her youngest daughter, Florine, these names are rough,
Oh boy.
and her mother-in-law. Now, the illness that Nannie's mother-in-law had since Nannie and Charlie got married got worse very suddenly with intense stomach pains, and she died as well.
Oh boy. Starting to notice a trend here.
Mm-hmm. Now, a year later, Charlie returned with a new woman, a new baby, and Melvina, and said that he wanted a divorce. Now, Nannie did give him a divorce and got out of the house, and she got Melvina back. Charlie just gave Melvina back to a woman that he thought was a murderer. So it was just Nannie, Melvina, and Florine, or whatever her name is. And Nannie returned with her 2 daughters to the Hazel farm and began writing letters in the Lonely Hearts section of the newspaper. she wasn't afraid to get a little naughty in these love notes she was sending. And she would send a photo of herself and some baked goods.
Okay. So this is like an early version of like OnlyFans.
Kind of, yeah.
So this is like an early OnlyFans. Where instead of
OnlyFans combined with like Tinder or whatever.
Yeah, whereas instead of explicit performances, you get baked goods.
And it wasn't long before she landed on a 22-year-old named Frank Harrelson from Jacksonville, Alabama. She sent him a little photo of herself and a slice of spice cake. And Frank seemed like the perfect gentleman, so romantic and everything, and he really swept her off her feet. And within 2 months, they were married. They moved to Cedartown, Georgia, and she thought that everything in her life was gonna be okay. But it wasn't long until he started drinking a lot. He was first drinking moonshine and then whiskey after Prohibition ended.
Oh boy.
She was home with the kids all the time, and she always had to bail him out from, being drunk. And it turns out that Frank had turned to these Lonely Hearts ads because he had a bad reputation of being a mean drunk in his hometown.
Oh, I'm sure, right.
He was drinking a lot, and it wasn't long until he started beating Nannie. See, these are the times when we do feel bad for her.
Absolutely, especially just because, it's just like, when would it end for her?
Yeah.
She grew up with a dickhead stepdad, then her husband. It's just like, when would it fucking end?
Right.
Regardless of the things she did.
Right.
When would the abuse against her fucking end? Right. It's just awful. Awful.
Now, she stayed in this marriage, though, for 16 years. Now, eventually, Melvina, her oldest daughter, gets married, and Florine, the youngest daughter, goes and moves in with Melvina to help with childcare. Now, Melvina gets pregnant again right after giving birth. And Nannie, was obsessed with her first grandchild, took care of him all the time, and, told Melvina that she only needed one kid, because Nannie remembered how hard it was for her to have her kids in such close succession. So when Melvina became pregnant again with a second baby right after her first baby, Nannie knew that this was some bullshit.
Oh, yeah.
So when the second baby was born, it was handed to Nannie, and just a couple minutes later, the doctor came back and found that this baby had died. Now, was this baby starved of oxygen during a difficult birth? Possibly, but...
Was it alive when it was handed to Nannie?
Yes, so I don't know.
Okay.
Now, Melvina had a weird nightmare/hallucination type thing soon after the baby was born. It was a very difficult birth, so she was, incredibly exhausted, but she thought that she saw her mother Nannie put a hat pin through the soft spot of the skull of the baby.
In this dream?
Yeah, but it could have been a hallucination, or she wasn't sure if it really happened.
Oh, Jesus.
Now, there was no evidence of this, but there was not evidence of this either, kind of thing. Florine said that she remembered seeing Nannie playing with a hat pin after the baby was pronounced dead. Now, this could just be a coincidence, and maybe Nannie just suffocated the baby when no one was in the room.
It just seems like that would be, I don't know, that's just, ugh.
Now, whatever truly happened, Nannie's daughters think that Nannie is capable of killing that baby. And it wasn't long until Melvina abandoned her first baby to Nannie after, her relationship fell apart. And unfortunately, it wasn't long until she killed her grandson Robert by putting arsenic in his cookies and pretty much force-fed him to eat these cookies over the next couple of hours.
Ugh.
He became tired and went to bed and unfortunately never woke up.
Ugh.
Now, apparently at the funeral for the baby, for the grandson Robert, Frank looked at Florine and Melvina and said, "I reckon I'm next."
Oh boy.
So people in her family really believed Nannie was capable of some shit.
Okay, all right.
And it wasn't long after that World War II came to an end. And everyone was out celebrating, having a good time. And the night of Japan's surrender, Frank went out and got drunk. And when he came home, he asked for sex from Nannie. She refused. And unfortunately, Frank then raped her.
Yikes.
So this was when Nannie decided that Frank had to die.
It sucks when but it's just like when things are just shitty all around.
Yeah.
When this person is doing these horrible things like murdering children, their spouses, but then also has the worst things imaginable happen to her.
Yeah.
It's just like, ugh. It's just like the worst cycle of just evil.
Yeah.
You know?
Like in that, along with her brain injury, it's just like...
Right. It's just like that's how monsters are made.
Yeah.
Like it's just the evil inflicted upon her. Of course, she's going to give that evil back to the world. Like, it's just, ugh.
Now, Nannie was working in the garden, thinking of how she could get Frank.
To get even. All right.
Yeah. And she found his moonshine jug buried in the front yard. I guess I don't know why he did that.
Bury it? Okay.
He would bury it and then drink from it. So she put in some rat poison and reburied the jug. And then that morning, he was found dead in the front yard. She went out there, she cleaned the jug out thoroughly, and then she called the police. And once again, no one suspected her for a second.
Good golly.
Now, much to her surprise, Frank actually had a pretty big life insurance policy. So she killed him without even knowing this.
Wow, okay.
So she kind of stumbled into quite a good amount of money. She bought 10 acres of land outside of Jacksonville, Alabama, built a cottage, and lived there. She was independent for the first time in her life, and you think she would like that, but she just craved this love and romance, and she thought that she was owed it. So she went for it. And she was like, you know what? I need this. So she went back to the Lonely Hearts columns, and at this point, she expanded her search to the whole country. She took trains all across America for 2 years to, check out these guys. And she eventually landed on Arlie Lanning from Lexington, North Carolina. He was smitten with her, and within days of knowing each other, they got engaged, and she moved to North Carolina. Now, it wasn't long until they were, once again, both cheating on each other all the time. They would just leave each other like these vague, weird notes saying that they were, going on a trip and they would be back soon, and then just be gone for, weeks at a time.
Right.
And then around Christmas time of 1952, Nannie felt the urge to start over again once more. This life wasn't how she pictured it, not what she was wanting.
Right.
So she made Arlie a stewed prune pie.
Oh boy.
A very sweet dish, and it perfectly covers up the taste and the sweetness of arsenic. He went to bed and never woke up either. And the doctors and the police and everything said that it was heart failure. Now, in Arlie's will, the house was given to Arlie's sister, but Nannie found out about that and found out that if the house was destroyed, that Nannie, would get the payout from the house insurance or the home insurance. So, about a month after Arlie died, before the deed went to Arlie's sister, and after Nannie's beloved TV was taken out of the house caught fire and burned to the ground.
Oh boy.
So she got the payout.
And she got that TV out of it.
And she got that TV. She loved watching TV.
Okay.
Now, she stayed in North Carolina for a few months to quote-unquote take care of Arlie's mother. She was giving her a steady diet of stewed prunes.
Okay.
And it wasn't long until Arlie's mother passed away as well. Now, Nannie's family at this point was writing her letters to go see her sister Dovey for some reason. I don't know why. Dovey was not doing well health-wise, but her family was afraid of her. I don't really know why they wanted Nannie to go see Dovey. I don't really understand it, but she did. And Nannie was with Dovey for about a week when Dovey was complaining of constipation. And Nannie was like, I have just the thing, and started giving her stewed prunes.
It's like an addiction now. She just can't help it.
She loves the stuff. And she gave her sister Dovey stewed prunes for about a week, and then Dovey died. Now, at this point, she found out that her stepfather, James, died, so her mother, Lou, came to live with Nannie. And it wasn't long after that Lou was given the stewed prune diet, and she died as well.
Wow. Now she's just taking out anyone who gets close.
Exactly. She just, anyone that's kind of an inconvenience to her.
Yeah.
She decides to just kill. Anyone that's a burden or an inconvenience or anything that's just getting in her way, she decides to kill. So at this point, Nannie doesn't really have anyone left in her life. And you would think that this would be kind of nice. She doesn't want to be tethered down, but she still has this like need for romance and for a relationship.
Right.
So she joins a dating club type thing, like a paid for service.
Okay.
And this time she comes across a guy named Richard Morton. And he was wealthy and they got married right away. And he was sober and devoted to her, which she liked, but he was very clingy and boring. And this was not her fantasy.
Uh-oh.
And it wasn't long until Nannie realized that Richard was in quite amount of debt as well. She read his mail and figured out that, he was in debt. And she realized that the longer that he is alive, the more debt he is going to accumulate.
Uh-oh.
So after only 3 months of marriage, she put stewed prunes with rat poison into an apple pie. And he went to bed and never woke up.
Yikes.
Once again, no one suspected a thing. And after the insurance payout paying off his debts, she was about $2,000 ahead in the game.
Oh, wow.
So at this point, she's in her 50s and she gets married again to a man named Samuel Doss in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And this was just a month after her previous husband, Richard, died. Now, Samuel Doss was very different. He didn't curse, he didn't sleep around, he didn't gamble, he didn't drink, but he was a huge control freak and a weirdo.
Oh, okay.
And he always went to bed at the same time, 9:30 p.m. every night. They had sex on appointed times that were on the calendar.
Yikes.
And just, was boring and frustrating. And she tried to just leave Samuel, but Samuel sent her letters saying that he agreed to let her have more control over their finances. So Nannie came back and decided to give it, another shot. But here's the thing. Nannie came back to Oklahoma with her romance literature with her most prized possessions. But Samuel didn't like this. He thought that these romance novels and magazines and everything put them in danger of damnation, and he destroyed them all.
Oh, boy. He done f***ed up.
She didn't like that. So, but here's the thing. Samuel didn't like sweets. Of course he didn't. He's a loser, but...
Of course.
So, she didn't really know. She couldn't just, give him a prune pie.
Right.
Like she was used to doing. So she just added a very small amount of arsenic to the coffee he would have at dinner every night. And it wasn't long before he started losing weight and was bedridden with horrible stomach pains. He was in the hospital for 23 days for a, quote, gastric infection, and Nannie played, the very concerned wife.
Of course.
Finally, he was out of the hospital, and he was released and sent home, and that night, she dumped a bunch of arsenic into his coffee and killed him.
Okay.
She was like, oh, I was so close killing him the first time, you know what, fuck it, I'm just gonna really go for it and kill him. And this was the first time that suspicion was kind of drawn up.
Okay.
The gastroenterologist who was working with Samuel thought that it was very curious and fascinating that he would have this long illness, seem to get better, and then just die all of a sudden.
Right, yeah.
So the doctor asked Nannie if he could do an autopsy as a personal favor to him, even though it wasn't required. Now, Nannie usually would say no, but he asked this of her in front of a group of people. So she was like, yeah, I guess you can.
Yeah.
An autopsy was performed, and there was ample evidence of arsenic poisoning found within Samuel's body. And finally, Nannie was arrested.
Wow.
She was brought in for questioning, and she would just give out all these giggles and everything about how ridiculous she thought that this questioning was about killing him. And after hours of questioning, they were like, listen, we can do this the hard way. We can dig up all these bodies of the other people in your life that have died around you and find out that they also died from arsenic poisoning, and you will die. Or you can admit that you did this.
Okay.
And you'll get life in prison. And also we'll give you some romance novels for your cell.
Oh boy, okay.
And she was like, okay, fine, I did it. But she said she only killed the husbands. She didn't say that she killed the women or the children.
Oh, okay.
So they did exhume the husbands and found the arsenic poisoning.
Right, yes.
And it was all but accepted and assumed that she killed the children and the women as well, but they didn't dig up their graves because they were like, she's already, in jail for her whole life. What's the point in disturbing these graves? And it turns out that Nannie had about 12 men on the hook ready to go for after Samuel died.
Wow.
Yeah, she had no plans of slowing down.
Wow.
So she was put into jail in Oklahoma for the rest of her life, and she died in 1965 at the age of 59.
Wow.
Of leukemia. And apparently she was still having pen pal relationships with people up until her death.
Goodness gracious. Folks, Maureen, what an incredible story. One I was not familiar with.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you for preparing that for us. What a awful person, but just who also had awful things happen to her.
Oh, yeah.
Just, awful in every way.
So terrible. I mean, it's such a terrible story because you feel bad for her in some instances, but then she kills children and stuff, and you don't feel bad for her, but her life was just terrible.
It truly was.
But I mean, that's like what you said, that's how these monsters get made sometimes.
That's right. Well, Maureen, I got a list of names I wouldn't mind sharing a stewed prune pie with.
Okay, come on.
Folks, the names of our top tier Patreon subscribers, of course, the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish Face Via Lundqvist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Vivacious Vicky McHugh, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the oh-so-suave Sean Richardson, the British Bonebreaker Bex Martin, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the Sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the Loathsome Johnny Love, the Carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the Killer Stud Carl Staub, the Firestarter Heather Carter, the Conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the Awfully Awesome Annie, the Murderous Maggie Leach, the Sir of Sexy Sam Hackworth, the Evil Elizabeth Riley, Lauren Hellfire Hernandez Lopez, the Maniacal Laura Maynard, the Vicious Karen Van Buren, the Arch Nemesis Aaron Bird, the Sadistic Sergio Castillo, the Rapscallion Ryan Crum, the Beast Benjamin Huang, the Devilish Chris Doucette, the Psycho Sam, the Electric Emily Zhang, the Ghoulish Gerd Hankum, the Renegade Corey Ramos, the Crazed Carlos, the Antagonist Andrew Park, the Monstrous Michaela Schur, and the Witchy Wonder J.P. Weimer. Yes.
Whoa. Thank you so much to all of our Patreon subscribers. A special shout out to that top tier, though. And thank all of you so much for listening. We can't thank you enough. And we do it for the squad.
That's right. And happy 2023, all citizens of the Milky Way. My name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
Good night and goodbye.
Goodbye.